to the garden. This week I'm planting all of my tomatoes out into the garden. And whether you're up potting your seedlings, planting out in large containers, or directly into the soil, the process is always exactly the same. But the first thing I want to do is just harvest the rest of my radishes. Wow, look at all of these. Now, whether I'm planting in a container or directly in my soil, I really like to loosen up all of this dirt. We're going to dig all the way down basically to the bottom of the container because we're going to plant the tomato really deep. I'm loosening this up in about the same size as the container, maybe a little bit larger so that it has room to grow. This loose soil is going to be a lot easier for the roots to spread. Now is the perfect time to add compost. And instead of just dumping it in, we want to mix it in with that soil. So now I'm starting to pile up the soil on the outside edge so that we can get access to the very bottom. Down here it's always going to be cool and moist, even in the peak of summer. So I'm going to check our depth. And the soil level is going to be right about here. So I'm going to remove any leaves that are under that point or just above. So now we're going to bury this right about up to here. So we're not going to have any leaves touching the soil or underneath the soil. I try not to touch the leaves very much. We can spread that early blight. So we're going to be careful not to cover these in soil or to drag them along in the dirt. But we need to flip this upside down. And then back up. That part can be a little tricky, especially if your tomato's really big. So now we can just backfill it around, and you can see right where we took those bottom leaves is right about at soil level. So even if they weren't buried, they would probably drag and touch the soil and also get splashback from underneath when it rains. I actually like to mulch with dried leaves. This creates a buffer in between the soil and our leaves so that they don't get splashback from underneath. That can really spread blight. We could even shred these down, and they do a really great job covering that soil. Now we can just water this in all around the base of the plant. We're not going to be wetting those leaves, we're just going to be wetting the soil. Because we've planted this so deep, it's going to be anchored from wind, so it's not as likely to topple over. It can grow roots all along that stem, which will really fortify the plant. The roots are already nice and low in the container, so they're going to be cool, they're going to be moist. It's just perfect for planting tomatoes. Now the last thing we need to do is just stake this up. You can use a cage or a couple simple stakes. If you are going to use a cage, it's best to do it now while the plant is still small. So I'm spreading out those tines a little bit. And we're going to just center it around the plant until we get pretty well anchored down. You want to try and get at least a foot in the soil. And usually I end up supporting these with stakes anyways, because they're not really strong enough to support a full beefsteak tomato. But this will grow into its cage just fine. So this is another beefsteak. It's going to get huge. It's already got a pretty hefty stem on it. That's awesome. So I'm going to very carefully swing this upside down. Right back up. We want to remove all these bottom leaves. Even the ones that are a few inches above the soil, they're likely going to droop and contact that soil eventually. There we go. Then I'm going to mulch over with my leaves. These will also keep in moisture too on a hot day. So let's do another cage here. So that's two really large beefsteak tomatoes planted out in containers. I've already done a couple Roma tomatoes in my in-ground beds. Over the years, I've been improving the soil with compost. I'm going to take out any rocks we find, but we just want to dig down about 8 to 10 inches, maybe a foot. So we're going to push up on this little seed cell to isolate our tomato. Put our hands over the soil. And then we've got our plant. But before we plant this, I like to pinch off these seed leaves because we're going to bury it past those leaves. So those will be underground and can rot. Some people will tease apart these roots, and if they're really coiled in there, that can be a good idea. These ones aren't too bad, so they can go directly in the soil. And from here, we can just bury in around that stem. You can lightly press the surface of the soil. So we've buried a good bit of that stem. And I'm going to mulch all the way around it so we don't get splashback from a little further away. If the leaves start to droop, you can try watering again or covering them so they get a break from the sun. So I hope you give this a go in your garden, planting your tomatoes as deep as you can, mulching over the top, and then staking them up with a cage or some hardy stakes. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.